The Deputy Prime Minister is with us, Dominic Raab. Let's start with that, should we? Mums being told they can't take their babies into the House of Commons.
Oh, look, I've got quite a lot of sympathy with Stella, and I've seen a lot of mums and dads with their very young children, babies, in the House of Commons. It is, of course, for the House of Commons authorities to work out what the right balance is. But on a personal level with young kids, I've got quite a bit of sympathy for Stella.
But haven't I seen at least 2 other babies in the House of Commons? So I don't understand why she's got this letter saying she can't do it.
I don't...
Will you look into it?
Well, as I said, it's for the House of Commons authorities, but I think there'll be quite a lot of interest. We want, effective functioning chambers, both in Westminster Hall and the House of Commons, but we also need to make sure that we're in the 21st century, that young parents, whether they're mums or dads, and I've seen dads as well as mums, but it's normally mum, carrying young children around the House of Commons. I think we've got to try and make that as flexible as we can.
OK. Mandatory vaccines, a conversation that needs to be had, according to the World Health Organisation this morning, speaking to us on the programme.
Well, maybe in some countries, but I don't think in the UK, given the extraordinary success that we've had in rolling out the vaccine, the number double jabbed. We've got a big increase, there's been a big push to get 12 to 15-year-olds jabbed. The rollout scheme of boosters is working very effectively, and as a result we've seen, not just on health terms but also with the ability to come out of the lockdown, the economy bouncing back in a way that some of the other economies and countries around the world haven't. I don't think we want to crow about that, but I think actually it shows that we've got the right balance here in the UK, and I think we should stick to our guns.
So we're ruling out mandatory vaccines?
Well, we said that we don't think we need to go to our Plan B, which itself doesn't include mandatory vaccines. Of course, we've looked at the specific considerations that need to apply in the NHS and to protect the residents of care homes, but it's never been even on our Plan B to have mandatory vaccines, and it still isn't.
Should it be a conversation that needs to be had, though, as the World Health Organisation has said this morning?
Well, we debate these things all the time, as we're doing now, so I don't think there's anything wrong with the conversation, but most people ask me what's the government's plan, and that's not.
What about masks?
Well, Plan B says that if we...
What about right now? We're not into Plan B yet.
Well, I think we require a bit of common sense. It depends on the context. But, for example, in the House of Commons, when it's busy, I'll wear a mask. And I've seen others doing the same. So, I don't think we need to divert from the course we're on right now. We do need to be vigilant. We know the cold winter months create more risk. But because of the success of not just the vaccine rollout, but particularly now the boosters, and that's being ramped up, I think we're far better protected than we've ever been. And in relative terms, I think most countries look with a degree of respect, if not envy, at how far we've gone. And that's not just the health fact. Of course, we've been able to open up from lockdown, and we've now got growth up, economic growth, jobs up, wages up. So I think we've got the balance right.
Yeah, but wearing a mask, apparently, if we all just wore a mask when we're out and about, according to the World Health Organisation, it would save 160,000 lives between now and next spring.
Well, look, we take the scientific advice very seriously, and of course we've got SAGE and the other groups that advise us on it. And of course there's a place for masks, and I've talked to you about how I think a bit of common sense comes into this. But I think we've got the balance right now. But we will stay vigilant on this. Yeah,
but the boss doesn't, does he? How many times have we seen photographs of him of late where he's not got his mask on? Last time was on a train.
Snappers are very good at catching that. All I can tell you is I've seen him wearing a mask.
Should wear his mask, and then he wouldn't get caught out, would he?
Well, look, I think I've seen him wear a mask, and I think he's very conscientious about the guidelines.
OK. Does he need to be more conscientious, given what we're hearing about the number of people's lives that would be saved if we wore masks properly?
Well, look, we take the advice. I mean, look, there will be scientists around the world. We listen to WHO, but fundamentally, we've got a group of scientists who advise the government. They can test the different views very closely amongst themselves. They then give us a range of options, and we follow that advice. And the advice says, at the moment, the balance is right.
He still doesn't wear his mask when he should do, though. 12 to 15-year-olds, apparently you wanted them all vaccinated by October half-term. It looks as though it's going to be at least until the end of February now before they're all done.
Well, look, there's been a massive effort, a massive surge. We've seen the number come up dramatically. I think it's 40% now, forgive me. I think it's 80% of over 12s who have now been double jabbed. I think it's 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds. And we will keep pushing until we've got all of them done. And it does give us great protection.
You accept that, so why has that happened?
We set very demanding targets.
So why have you missed it?
Look, it's a challenge, but we're ramping it up. I know Sajid Javid and the team are doing everything we can. We've seen a big increase in the number of booster shots being dispensed. We were talking about that last time we were on the show. And look, we set demanding targets. We don't just set boxes to be ticked.
I understand, but you set the target and you missed it.
Look, we're very close, as you described yourself, in terms of the time frame of getting those 12 to 15-year-olds all vaccinated, and we know that
5 months after you said
and we know
you do it.
we know the protection is working. But look, we make no apology for putting demanding targets, really pushing the envelope on this, and it's working, and that's the key thing.
If not on the timescale you promised, but there we are. Talk to us about free lateral flow tests. How long will they continue?
Look, these are judgment calls that the Health Secretary and the government will make.
The Deputy Prime Minister.
I appreciate that. And as you know, I've been very focused on victims' law, human rights reform and the HARPER laws. But look, the Health Secretary will make further announcements on that in due course.
But we are being told that we should take a COVID test before visiting busy places. So I'm guessing that you're going to extend these lateral flow tests for people, free ones at home.
I don't guess. The Health Secretary and the government will set any new announcements we make on this. Look, I think it's important to keep getting tested, but of course, as we found with furlough, as we found with other things, we need to transition from the emergency stage to the recovery stage, if I can put it that way, not just from the pandemic, but for the economy as a whole. And look, the Health Secretary will set out any further changes. And I know Sajid Javid looks at these things very rigorously.
I mean, you see them all the time.
And when the decision is made...
How long do we think that they should be free for?
When the
because
decision...
people won't be able to afford them otherwise.
Well, and they are at the moment, and when a decision is made on the future, how long it will go for, the Health Secretary will set that out in the proper way.
It's not going to happen ahead of the winter, the winter virus concerns, though, is it?
Well, I think you're right to say that during the colder months, we need to do as much as we can, not just on the vaccine and the booster rollout, but on testing and tracing and the other measures that we've taken. It is important to make sure we see ourselves through the new year and beyond.
OK, talk to me about Harper's Law.
Look, we've got the incredibly tragic case of the killing of PC Andrew Harper. This was someone who was responding to a burglary and pursuing 3 suspects. He was dragged along a car, he was caught in the strap of the car, dragged along until he died. Harrowing.
Horrible, horrendous.
And he was given, as a result of a manslaughter conviction, he was given, the perpetrators, 3 of them, were given between 13 and 16 years. I think Lissy Harper and the Police Federation made a compelling case that that wasn't strong enough. And so we're going to make it a mandatory life sentence. By the way, just to say, it's not just responding to this case, and I've spoken to Lissy and the Police Fed about it, and I'm convinced of it, but also the scale of the attacks that we see on emergency workers who are putting themselves on the line for us day in, day out. 10,000 convictions last year alone for assaults on emergency workers. I think this is right. I think it reflects the severity of the offence, and I want our emergency workers to know that we've got their back.
I understand that. But how does it differ from the sentencing that's in place at the moment?
Well, in this kind of case, the 2 perpetrators, actually 3, got between 13 and 16 years. There'll be a mandatory life sentence, minimum tariff set by the judge. That's what you would typically get for murder. And I think, OK, so it's a higher sentence. I think it's right. I think it reflects the severity of the offence. I do think there is something specifically egregious about attacking and killing an emergency worker in the course of their duty. And I want the victims' families, people like Lissy, but also across the country, as well as the emergency workers themselves, to know that we're standing up for them.
But am I not right in saying that you can be sentenced to life for manslaughter at the moment?
But as you can see, they weren't in this case.
No, the option was there for the
Sure,
judge.
and look, it's right to question how much judicial discretion will be left to the court. There will be, in truly exceptional cases, the ability to adjust the sentence, but very exceptional. And what we're saying is that the baseline is going to be a mandatory life sentence, and those tougher sentences, I think, are warranted by the severity of the case. And I think people want to hear us standing up, not just for emergency workers, but the victims of crime. And I'm going to be, introducing.
But the option was there for the judge already, is what I'm saying.
And we want to make sure that the starting point is a significantly higher level than 13 to 16 years.
But you acknowledge that he could have given them a life sentence if he'd wanted to.
Look, I respect our judiciary, and I don't think that they did anything incorrect. But it's up to ultimately elected politicians and the government, and me as Justice Secretary, working with Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, to decide if that's not enough. And we're saying in this kind of case, it's not enough.
No, but he could have sentenced them to life if he'd wanted to.
Now, look, the judicial discretion is there. So what we want to make sure is not could
You're
have.
telling judges what to do?
We're setting a higher framework and a higher threshold for sentencing. Yes, that's my job.
Yeah, so you're telling them that it was he did the wrong thing in that case?
No, I'm not. Look, I think under the rules and the framework, which Parliament is responsible for putting in place and we as government are accountable for, I think the judges were correct. Of course, we tried to review and appeal and get the sentence raised. Rob Buckland, my predecessor, did that. That was declined. Again, perfectly, there's no question of impropriety. But ultimately, what the judiciary will quite rightly say is if you want higher sentences, you, the government and Parliament, must pass it. That's what we're doing.
OK. What's happening about the migration problems and the fact that, 25,000 people have managed to come across so far this year? And we've seen in the papers this weekend, or last weekend, I should say, that the Home Secretary's team are calling her a moron. My goodness.
Look, you always hear these sort of rumours, snippets in the newspaper. I've worked very closely with the Home Secretary. I continue to do so.
And she's not a moron.
Or she most certainly is not. But she's very strong-willed and determined, which is what you want in a Home Secretary. And I know that she's also very smart the way she's going about this. She's looking at the operational cooperation we have with the French, the number of...
How's that going?
Thousands of boats have been intercepted, prevented from travelling. Convictions, we've got increasing number of convictions. And the fundamental thing for us is we've got to avoid the so-called pull factor, the incentives for people to be taking that perilous journey. And the big thing we're focused on is cracking down on the predatory criminal gangs who make their profit out of this trade in misery and being very clear with the legislation, the Sovereign Borders Bill that we're putting through and the other legislation, that actually there is a distinction between legal routes to come to this country and illegal routes. She's absolutely right about that.
OK. The French, we promised them £54 million in order to try to stop people getting to our borders in the first place. We're not giving them all of that money, and as a result, they're buying quad bikes and things to try and keep people back.
I think the French have had plenty of investment because
no,
we
promised them
we've lived up to our responsibilities. This is a shared responsibility. I mean, frankly, those migrants should be assessed in the first country that they arrive in. And I recognise that the French have got a problem because those migrants are coming in via the south of Europe and increasingly from the east. We've seen the issues with Belarus in this regard, and then making their way to France. But a significant number want to come to the UK. What the French will say is actually in those other countries, that's where they should be assessed. We agree with that. So actually, it's a good example of where, and it's election season in France, so let's be mindful of this, the reality of that.
You're saying Macron's electioneering?
No, I'm saying I recognise that during an election, this is very sensitive because it's a reality. But what I'm also saying is that there is a national interest that the French have and that the UK have in saying, actually, these migrants should be dealt with in the first port of entry or elsewhere.
The question, Deputy Prime Minister, it was, why have we not given them the money that we promised them?
We've given them a significant amount of investment. I don't agree that we've reneged on any commitments we've made.
You've given them about 12 million quid out of 54.
No, we've given them a significant amount. And we're always willing to work more closely with the French government to tackle this problem. The reality is we need to, deal with the challenge in source countries, which is why we say ultimately refugees and migrants should be assessed closer to the region or the country they come from. And ultimately, if they're coming in through Europe, they ought to be assessed in the first port of entry. And actually, that's something which the UK and the French ought to make common ground on.
Are we going to give them any more money or not?
Look, we'll make those announcements in the usual way. We're not just handing over. It's their responsibility to do this. So it's not just
but we did promise them the cash.
No, look,
I'm just asking you whether we're going to give
I want
them.
to say, well, look, we've given money in the past. We will continue to look at how we can do this as a shared endeavour. I think a partnership approach is win-win for both sides. So we'll continue. And the Home Secretary, who has a very good relationship with the Interior Minister in France, will continue to do that.
OK. As it comes up to 9 o'clock, my viewers will want to know whether you think that the Prime Minister is losing the plot.
No, I think we've got a plan coming out of this pandemic with the boosters for the vaccine, on the economy, jobs up, growth up, economic growth up, wages up. We've put £96 billion announced this week of investment into transport infrastructure, particularly the Midlands and the North. I've been talking about criminal justice reform, HARPER'S law. I'm going to be coming up with a victims' law for consultation, human rights reform. We're getting on with the job, and that's what we're absolutely focused on.
Yeah, but is the PM losing the plot?
No, I'm in meetings with him every day. He's the steward of this government, the leader of this government, fired up with the energy. I mean, people talk about the pent-up economic demand coming out of lockdown. I would say there's a huge amount of pent-up political energy that the Prime Minister is driving forward, and we're going to spend the next 2-3 years of this Parliament delivering on the people's priorities, from economic jobs, livelihoods, supporting businesses, through to my area, which is criminal justice reform, to make sure we stand up for victims, we've got the sentences in place, we build the prisons we need.
OK, you know why I'm asking you that, because I mean, you know, he can't even paginate his own pages. Then he bangs on about Peppa Pig. What's all that about?
I think, you know, one of the things about I mean, I mentioned the economic reform, jobs up, growth up, wages up. We talk about great British exports, and frankly, in this country, we don't back ourselves enough. We're too much self-flagellating. Peppa Pig, many of your viewers will have watched it either as grandparents or parents. I watched it with my boys when they were younger. But it's actually a huge British export. It's the point he was making.
Why did he say that?
Well, he did make this point. It's a huge British export.
No, he didn't. He made a sound of a car.
It's listened to, watched in China. How many people will be aware of that? And his point he's making is from our creative arts through to our technological ingenuity and the exports that brings and the revenue and the jobs that brings this country, we should back ourselves. He's the one with the ambition, the optimism, but also a very clear plan. And frankly, he leads all of the other parties and leaders in his wake.
You know what I'm going to ask you, don't you?
I do. I never know.
Have you been to Peppa Pig World?
I have. I have, yeah, with my boys. I loved it. They're a bit older now, so...
Tell me about it.
It's a day of my life I won't get back.
Well, the Prime Minister says it's fantastic.
Oh, it's quite fun. And when they're at that age, it's quite fun.
OK. Final thought goes to the former Health Secretary, who would be Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt, and he said the government's had a pretty shocking few weeks.
Jeremy's a close friend. I'm not going to comment on the commentary of those on the backbenches, but look, there are all sorts of distractions. For me, for the Prime Minister, for everyone from the Chancellor through to the Home Secretary, we want to be focused as possible on the things that your viewers really care about. Jobs, the NHS backlog, crime, those are the things we're dealing with. And there's a lot of political distractions, and I get that, and it's fair to ask me all of those questions, but that's what we're focused on.
And you relax at the weekend by eating vindaloo, is that right?
I'm actually, do you know, I made the point about reform, and on the scale of reform, as between korma and vindaloo, I'm sort of pitching it more to the vindaloo edge. Personally, I don't ever get more spicy than a madras or a jalfrezi.
Good to know.
If I'm really honest.
It's good to talk to you as always. Thanks very much indeed.